Welcome everyone to tonight's session, and thank you so much for taking the time out, particularly because it's the evening and you'll all have lots of different things on. So I'm Sara Spencer, and I'm here with my colleague Alison Down. We both work for a Child Poverty Action Group in Scotland, and we work for a project called Cost the School Day. The cost barriers to fully taking part at school, and Cost of the School Day is all about raising awareness of that and working with schools to understand where difficulties might lie for children and families when it comes to costs, and also what solutions or approaches might work to reduce costs and increase and inclusion for everyone, no matter how much money they have. We work nationally in lots of different local authorities now, but the project did start in Glasgow about 6 years ago. We did loads of super work with the Glasgow Parents Forum formerly. So yeah, we're chuffed to be here tonight. Thank you for coming. I'll move on. I would love to be sort of standing, talking to you face to face, especially because there wouldn't be the risk that my kids would barge in at any minute. But you know, here we are. So if we, as Leanne says, if we can try to make it sort of as interactive as possible, and you put any thoughts or questions or maybe any examples of things that your school is doing in this area, any kind of good practice, that in the Q&A. If you'd like to, pop your camera on so we can see your faces, but obviously it's evening, you've all got kids at home, so we understand if not. Tonight then, we're going to look at a few different things, and I suppose what I really want to get over, or what Alison and I really want to get over tonight, are three main things. Firstly, that there will be children and families in your schools, in households that are struggling to make ends meet. And the likelihood of that is even greater at the moment because of the really serious financial impact that COVID is having on family finances. Secondly, I suppose it's always been the case that school costs can add to financial pressures for families, you know, uniform, lunch, trips, clubs, resources, all of the different things that we all kind of have in our minds. And there's always been the risk that school costs that are difficult to afford could stand in the way of children taking part, possibly, or leave them feeling different or excluded. Lots of the work we've done with children and young people over the years tell us that that's the case. And you know, again, COVID is pushing more and more families into poverty. So I think it's important to think that, you know, all of this is even more likely for even more children and young people. But thirdly, the third point I really want to sort of emphasise, because I think it's the most important one. It doesn't have to be like that. There are so many examples of schools who are really, really aware and mindful of all of this, and are doing brilliant things to reduce costs and make sure that school isn't another source of pressure or anxiety for families who are struggling with money. In lots of those schools, parents and parent councils play a really, really critical role in that. So we want tonight to encourage you to think about how you can be part of that in your schools, because it's really never been more needed than it now. I'll give you some sort of big picture child poverty stuff, just as information at the start here. So a quarter of all children in Scotland are living in poverty, just under a quarter. So that's a quarter of all of our children in Scotland living in house. Patterns of poverty have changed in recent years. There's been a big rise in work poverty, meaning that actually 2/3 of the children who are living in low-income households have a parent who is working, but that income isn't enough to keep the family afloat. And while incomes have kind of stayed the same or have dropped in recent years, the cost of living has shot up, meaning that more families have slipped under into poverty. And obviously, we know that means stress, that means pressure, it means making really difficult choices, it means saying no a lot to your children, to yourself, to your family, and it means difficulty taking part in just everyday activities that we all sort of we'd hope to take for granted. And for children and young people, we know that living on a low income, there's a risk that it affects every aspect of their lives, and there's a risk that it unfairly holds them back. The challenges that poverty creates for children and young people puts them at risk of poorer health, poorer attainment, and poorer outcomes just across the board. And that's not acceptable and should never be seen as inevitable. In Glasgow, this sort of more local picture, a few years back, it was estimated that 27% of children are living in poverty in Glasgow. The most recent figures last year show that's 31.8% of children. You can see all of the different levels here. So often rates by constituency are even high. Glasgow Central, they're standing at 41.3% children on average living in poverty. That's not the case across that whole area. It's going to vary by area, by school, by lots of things. But I think it's clear, looking at this map, that there are a really significant number of children in Glasgow living in homes where getting by is a struggle and where their parents might be unable to cover costs of things like heating, food, clothing, travel, and just all the everyday stuff that we spend money on. And this was before COVID. I think, gosh, COVID's been responsible for lots of grim news stories over the last few months, hasn't it? But one of the striking ones, I think, is the way in which the crisis has affected those of us who are living on lower incomes. We're in the last days of the furlough scheme that was set up to respond to the crisis, and after that we expect a quite huge leap in unemployment as those whose jobs are no longer viable are made redundant. And those who are already trying to get by on 0 hours contracts or other sort of low paid or insecure work face even more instability. So if families were only just coping before, the experience of the last few months has been a huge blow to them. There's a sort of metaphor, I think, that's useful here, which is that we've all been in the same COVID storm, but we're all in really different boats with different levels of protection. Some of us are going to be able to stay afloat, and some of us are going to be pulled under. The crisis has made people who were struggling financially before even more vulnerable. Almost 2/3 of families on low incomes with children in Scotland can't afford to make savings of regular savings of £10 or more a month. So there's not that cushion to fall back on. 9.1 million people across the country have been furloughed for at least some proportion of time and living on 80% of their usual wages, as you know. And we've seen huge increase in new claims over this period, with millions more people needing to fall back on that support that's there for us when times are hard. So overall, it's estimated that an additional 200,000 children across the UK will be pushed into poverty by this crisis. And, unsurprisingly, all of this is taking its toll on families. It means stress, it means worry, it means not having enough to get by. Some research a couple of months back with people who were claiming universal credit showed that 7 in 10 families were having to cut back on essentials, with about 50% cutting back on food. 6 in 10 were having to borrow money to get by, and over half were behind on their rent or essential bills. And 65% here on the slide that say their mental health had been affected by money worries. No wonder. This has been such a, this has been and still is such a sort of scary and unpredictable time for all of us and for our friends and for our families, and have that fear and pressure and anxiety about making ends meet, keeping a roof over your head, keeping children happy. The pressure of that is really phenomenal. And of course, none of us can forget when schools were closed. Feels like yesterday and a long time ago at the same time. These are some quotes from some research that we at Child Poverty Action Group did with parents and children during lockdown when schools were closed. And home learning was really tough for probably everyone in some way. I know it certainly was here, but we heard lots of extra challenges in the research from families on lower incomes who were talking about difficulties affording food and basics, and also the resources that their children needed to learn at home, and kind of not just do the learning, not just do the work that was coming through, but keeping that connection with their schools that they were missing so much. So there's lots of interesting stuff in this report. I just wanted to sort of mention it. It's called The Cost of Learning in Lockdown, and it's just on our website if you want to have a wee look, or maybe Leanne can send the link round. And I think what it shows is, as we know, lots of families, lots of children and young people were having a tough time during lockdown, and that has a knock-on effect to now when we're back at school. So school are the usual sort of additional costs of being able to participate fully in the same way as everyone else. There are some things obviously that cost, like maybe like trips or clubs that have stopped for the moment, so that there aren't cost implications there. But there's still things like uniform, food, travel, resources, and also some new costs potentially when it comes to things like face masks, your own water bottle, kit for outdoor learning. That's going to vary from school to school, but there are potentially some extra costs or new costs to think about there. And schools have lots of experience of seeing children and young people on low incomes unable to afford some school costs and doing what they can to make sure that doesn't impact on their learning or what they can take part in. So to some extent it's familiar. The difference right now, I think, is that it's even more urgent because it is affecting even more families. And not to say it wasn't urgent in the first place, but it's just it's something that feels very critical at the moment. And what that means is that there's an even greater need to be mindful of and all be doing what we can to make sure additional pressures aren't being added at school. You're never, you know, in your parent councils, you know, you're not going to necessarily know who in your school is struggling because it's not necessarily information that's going to be shouted about. But if COVID has done anything, I think it's shown that financial situations can change in a heartbeat and that anyone in the school can be facing the challenges I've been describing. So making sure that school policies and practices and the way things work in schools are designed with all of this in mind, it's really, really crucial. You know, you don't know how many families maybe a really affordable uniform policy or a really well subsidised trip or a really good IT lending scheme or anything like that. You don't know how many families that's actually going to impact on and how much that's going to be lifting a burden from families' backs. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Alison for the next few slides.
Hi everyone. I suppose just to get a sense of what we're talking about and what families are facing, I'd like to sort of pause and think for a minute about how those costs mount up. These are just a few of the things that you might have to find money for, or you all probably have had to find money for: food, uniforms, clubs, travel, stationery, IT and trips. I assume that your school has costs that are similar to my kids' schools. I suppose just to kick off with uniform, a couple of years back I had one child going into a secondary school and the other child going into primary. The primary school kid cost buttons to clothe because she had two big sisters who were fairly careful with their clothes. We had to get shoes and a sparkly bag, but that was our costs. The other one, however, had to get a whole new uniform. Everything had to be in a different colour. She needed to have a badged blazer and badged polo shirts for PE, and she wanted docks, but that year she had the cheap alternative because I'd already spent a small fortune on her. So I'd say in total, we were looking at well over 150 quid, maybe closer to 200, which is quite a thought. So I'm wondering whether anybody's had a similar experience, because I don't know, can you remember how much roughly you were paying out at the beginning of term? And I think for those of us who are not worrying about cash, it's not something that you kind of like you bear in mind. You pay it and you go. But for families who are, it's a bigger consideration. Maybe you've been stung for school trips. When we moved house a few years ago, the parent council in our old school was really good at stumping up and helping out. Not so in the new school, and we were surprised at how much all that cost. And for food at school, you have to be on a very low income indeed to qualify for school meals. So most people have to pay, even if they're on a lower income. A meal in a school now is, I think, £1.90 a day. So over the course of a week, that adds up to £9.50. Over the month, that's £38. And if you have two children, that's £76 over the course of a month, which is a considerable amount of money if you're on a lower income. Can I have the next slide, please? So we know that there are really significant costs associated with sending children to school, but there are also things that schools have been doing to help. Many schools in Glasgow have put a lot of time and effort into reducing or removing costs for children and their families, and Miller Primary School in Castlemilk is just one of those schools. I had a hugely inspiring visit to Miller. not long back, and it was great fun to go and see them. And it was also a lot of fun filming with Amy, Jaden and Cara.
This is Miller Primary School, and we want to show you a wee bit about what people have in their classrooms. Follow me. This is where our resources are. Here we have pencils, rubbers, sharpeners, calculators. Then we'll have sticks, scissors, white paper, whiteboard pens and whiteboards, multiplication squares. Like over here we have games to books to do when we finish a task.
Having the pens and pencils and resources to hand and everybody having access to them means there's no stigma attached to not maybe having a pen or a pencil to hand. It's organised in every classroom in a different way, but it's always ready available for the children, and the children know they can come to school. They don't even really need a school bag, and everything will be provided for them.
I don't have to bring in pencils or pens because the school always has them provided.
That means that everybody is the same. So the children might bring in a pencil case and choose to use it, but they might not, but it doesn't matter. Actually, the children who bring pencil cases in are in the minority. Most of the children use the resources within the school.
Because maybe some families are poor and they can't, they're not able to pay for pencils and all that. So it's good that the school provides them.
I think Cost of the School Day has given children access to resources and to experiences and to school life that in other places it might cost, and I think it's really important to take account of Cost of the School Day, because you don't realise the barrier that can be for certain families to be able to access what other people take for granted.
I'm very sad that the school doesn't have dinosaur-shaped rubbers. I'll print them a dinosaur on it. Yeah, me too. Me too.
Well, hopefully the digital delays didn't spoil that too much. Just one of the sort of setbacks with of having to do this over a Zoom meeting. But anyway, and I'm not sure whether the school's been lucky enough to get dinosaur-shaped stationery yet, because that was the big ask at the end there. But anyway, what you saw Miller Primary School has done is removed what might seem like a really simple barrier to learning, which is not having a pencil or pen. But the difference it's made can be huge. The children don't feel bad about not having the right things for school and are happier to learn as a result. By the way, the atmosphere in that school was fantastic, and I think it's a great tribute to what Lorraine Booth and her teaching team have done, because it did feel like an open and a school that just welcomed everybody regardless and made the children feel exactly that way. Have the next slide.
It's thinking about it.
Fair enough, so am I.
Hello. It's always a wee bit funny after one that's playing a film. Hold on a second. There we go.
Fantastic. So you're all seeing that now, I hope. The list that you're looking at now came from a group of young people in Glasgow. These are the things that they told us make them feel like they fit in. So if you'd like to take a few minutes to have a quick look. I mean, to be honest, there's nothing there that I wouldn't agree with and don't feel really sort of natural, the things that you would have wanted in your own time at school and we all want for our children. And also none of those things on that list seem completely unachievable, but altogether they do make a huge difference to children and young people. At Cost of the School Day, we are very aware of the fact that even small changes can make a big difference. Can I have the next slide? If you're now wondering where to start, then it's not a bad idea to look at what other parent councils have done. This isn't quite the top 10 parent council actions. I wish I could provide that for you, but they are all the things that have been done in schools around Glasgow and Scotland and have worked. They might not be completely right for your school for so many different reasons. Schools are all different, as we know, and what works in one might not work in another. However, I think they could provide quite a useful starting point for your parent council. So, for instance, with action number 10, if recycling blazers, ties and sweatshirts can't be done in the school itself, is there an organisation nearby that could sort things out for you? And then you promote that organisation to the parents and carers in your school so that everyone knows where to go for help. So perhaps action 5, it's a great thing to do, consider fees, but if there is a cost element to what you're putting on for children, then it might be difficult to waive the fee. So alternatively, what you could do is set up a chuck it in a bucket arrangement where people pay what they can afford or ask for donations rather than a set fee. And with so many of these ideas, particularly, I suppose, number 3 and number 8, it's important to think about offering advice and information and help universally. Partly this is because you may not know who needs help. People's circumstances can change very rapidly, and particularly at the moment. But also, if we offer this information to everyone rather than targeting groups or individuals, it removes the stigma that might put people off. There's lots more information like this in the Parent Council Toolkit, which just happens to have been developed in Glasgow, and you can find that on our website. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Seamless. Okay, so kind of seamless. Okay, so I think something that can really help in terms of knowing what actions to take, you know, what the right direction is for your parent council, for the parents in your school, is actually consulting with other parents in your school about this, about costs and about policies that are going to have cost implications or events or anything really happening. So the way that you would do that has obviously changed a lot since March, now that we're all socially distanced and, you know, can't even go into schools at the moment. And there are a few suggestions on the slide of ways that it could be done, because I think it can still be done. You know, surveys. I know a lot of parent councils have moved on to Zoom meetings where, you know, the wider parent forum can be invited along as well. You know, there's various bits and bobs that can mean that you're able to engage with parents in your school. Social media is another one. There are obviously limitations in terms of having the IT and the kind of ability to access these things, but I suppose it's just thinking of as many different ways as possible. And I think what we've found, or what we've heard from other parent councils doing this sort of thing, is that a really open approach to asking about these things, where there's a focus on making sure that all children in the school community are happy and are included. That's a really good way to go with this in terms of how it's conducted. You don't need to be asking any personal information. That's not what this is about. It's just about fulfilling the duties of a parent council to consult with its parents on really, really important issues. Another important action that can be taken potentially that could help to support families and children in your schools is awareness raising about support that's out there. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these different boxes here, but you can see that there is some support out there for eligible families. Now, none of these are going to, lift a family entirely out of poverty, but it is going to help to maximise their incomes and make things a wee bit easier, which can really, really help. I think Alison had said a wee bit earlier, the thresholds for eligibility for some of these types of support are very low, and there are many families still struggling who won't be eligible here. But at the moment, we know that there are nowhere near the right number of people claiming what they're entitled to, when it could make a difference to their incomes. So I suppose something that can be done that's probably dead straightforward is trying to make sure that the people who can claim are claiming at the very least. And you can do that in a variety of ways. That is kind of promote the financial entitlement, and just anything you're doing that's designed to reduce the cost of the school day. Newsletters, posters, social media, getting the word out there, the good things that you're doing to tackle costs and the things you're doing to consult with and support families is really important. And I think it does help to normalise the conversation and kind of efforts in this area, because being really quiet and hush-hush about all of these things as if it's something to feel embarrassed about, actually it's affecting so many families in Glasgow. That kind of hush-hush approach can actually add the shame and the stigma that's so often to living on a low income. So an open approach that's all about supporting families without judgment is a really positive way to proceed with this. So I suppose this is the limit in terms of how you can be involved in reducing the cost of the school day in your school. I think it's really exciting, and it's really, really needed at this time. So to close this section, I thought it would be helpful to spell out a few potential next steps from here. If you're feeling about this and want to do something, then we'd suggest the first sort of step, maybe sharing some of these slides or the information in them with your parent council or relevant people in your schools, and adding cost of the school day to your next parent council agenda, and pledging to find out more about what your school's already doing and what costs are part of your school day. As a starter for discussions in your meetings, there are a few questions here just to start things off. I don't think it'll get sorted in one meeting. It's not a kind of one-off thing. It's a bit of a process. It's a bit of a way of thinking. It's I suppose a mindset that puts costs and financial pressures as a sort of constant consideration when you're planning or doing anything in school, and because for families who are under pressure, that's what it is. It's constant. Our website has loads of resources on it that can help, and we're also at the end of the phone or an email if you want to chat over any ideas. We're funded to provide support kind of nationally, and are really happy to speak at any point. Alison is going to talk about another quick thing next before we close on another short film from schools, featuring schools and children, young people and staff. But I suppose we could just pause here and see if there was anything folk wanted to ask, or if there was anything in the Q&A that Leanne or Catherine wanted to highlight.
Okay, I'll come in there with, somebody has posted on the Q&A and it's Judith Stevenson, who is interested to see Miller Primary in Castlemilk featuring. She's a solicitor with Castlemilk Law Centre, and saying that if we give a shout out to the Law Centre in Castlemilk and possibly other law centres around the city, they do free benefit checks for people to help maximise income and entitlements. And Leanne has added to that the Money Matters service could also do that in different areas. So there's lots of support there. And I think that parent councils play a really vital role in sharing some of this. So I would suggest to Judith making contact with the school, making contact with Lorraine Booth at the school, who is very open to that sort of thing. And maybe the parent council could share some information on their page. So that's the only question or comment that's on the Q&A at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant point. I think there are lots of things that can be done to help in the short term for families. Things like you know, maybe it's food banks or kind of things that are designed to help in a crisis. But what will actually help families is having more and you know, the way that can happen is through places like law centres and CABs and kind of people who can make sure that people are getting what they're entitled to and getting the support they need. So yeah, ideally every school would have a sort of list of people a list of organisations locally who can help with that. It's a really important thing.
We've also got One Parent Family Scotland for lone parents. Having a helpline has been mentioned, and local housing providers and housing associations, I know they do lots of work. They also have welfare rights officers to provide free help and advice. So there is lots out there, and often people don't know about these things. And again, I think parent councils can play you know, a really vital role in just putting that, if they have a social media feed, if it's Facebook, get it out there just so that people know what the local agencies can offer, and for those local agencies to see parent councils as a good resource for doing so.
Absolutely, that sounds great, actually.
Okay. Okay, well, if there are no other burning questions or issues or things that people want to share for the moment, if it's something, as I say, then you know, feel free to get in touch with us. Our details are on the slides. But I'm going to pass over to Alison just for a couple of slides before we close on a video, and I'm going to tell you about a wee bit of work that you might be interested in getting involved with.
Okay. So pretty much everything we do at Cost of the School Day is based on real life experience. So we've listened to what people tell us and developed resources, training and advice based on those suggestions and what works in schools. This is just one of the hundreds of quotes that we've gathered over the years. So what you're looking at now is a quote from a parent who feels like her school doesn't care about families who are struggling. There's a lot to take in there, and I'm sure we all recognise parts of the situation this person finds herself in. So at this time of year particularly, there's lots of pressure on families to take part in all the events that happen in the autumn term, even during a pandemic. But there can be a cost to all of this. So obviously the heartbreaking part of this quote is clearly the fact that the parent has gone without food to afford things for school. And unfortunately, this child's school has unwittingly piled on the pressure through how it communicates with parents. And I can't imagine that the school wanted to do this, but without really considering how poverty sensitive their wording was, I think that's what's happened. The words that stand out to me in this quote are embarrassed, labelled and bullied, because they have to be the last things any parent would want for their children. We think that this situation could have been avoided though, and what we're working towards at the moment is to build resources so that schools know more about how communication can be done in a way that really helps build relationships with parents rather than damaging them. Can I have the next slide? So to be fair, talking about costs and money is just not that easy sometimes. It's rare to find people who like talking about money unless it's what they plan to do with that big lottery win, if it ever happens. So I think we can agree that it's just a difficult subject for most of us. So on one side of this slide, you'll see how teachers might be feeling about this. Things like, I don't want to make assumptions, I find it difficult to talk about this, or even it's just not my job. On the other side of the wall, you'll see how parents and carers might be feeling about talking about money. People probably don't want everyone knowing their business, they don't want to ask for help, and many of the words here are actually direct quotes from our research. We put a wall down the middle because it's a really clear metaphor for what's happening here. There's a barrier to talking about costs, which in turn creates other barriers to learning for many children. But as we've been saying, it doesn't have to be like that. We can remove the barriers created by poor communication. I think it's really, and this is our idea, it's just a matter of letting school staff know what kinds of communication work and what doesn't leave people feeling awkward and embarrassed. Can I have the next slide? Taking its time. Oh, it's there. We're also in a really interesting time, I think. These are just some of the ways that schools communicate with us now. So when I had my first child in school, which is about a decade ago, but I don't like to say that and think about it too often, the standard communication was through letters stuffed into our school bag. So this was far from ideal, given that I was rubbish at checking our bag. When I finally found things, which were usually dog-eared and stained and unpleasant, they might well have even been out of date. So luckily I got slightly better at checking, so that was good. But then we also had emails, and then Facebook and Twitter and websites and online newsletters and apps. So now messages are really coming at us from every direction. I have to confess that sometimes I miss the dog-eared letters from the bottom of the bag. However, messages come to you and what sort of form, and whether they're on apps or online or whatever, it's the content that's important, and this is where you can help us. As I was saying earlier, what we want to do is to understand what good communication looks like. We can guess at that, but there's no point in doing that because we have all you to talk to, really. We want to know about your experience. Have you seen things that made you really feel that the school was on your side? Is there anything that you've seen in school messages that's actually really annoyed you? Do you think that schools could get better at talking about costs and money, and how would they do that? Or alternatively, if they're great at doing this, why? And what have they done that you like? So as I was saying, we are going to build resources for schools to help everyone feel more confident about this kind of communication. We are going to run a survey very soon, which I hope Leanne can pass on to everybody. So please do fill it out, because we'd really like to hear what you have to say. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be having a chinwag session too. Again, this will be facilitated by Leanne, so thank you, Leanne, which I hope you can come along to and tell us more about your experiences. So parent council people, you are in a great place to help us with this. We need lots of suggestions and lots of different parents to tell us how they feel about how the school talks to them. So basically, we need to hear your views. So thank you. Next slide.
Thanks. Okay. Okay, so this is these are our details here. You can get in touch with us, as I say, if there's anything that you want to ask more about, or anything you want, any help you want to take this forward. We're going to leave you with a thank you very much, and you know, it's great that you took the time to come to the session tonight, and I hope that you got something out of it. But we're going to leave you with a short film, just talking about the difference that the cost of the school day makes.
Well, I think there's a question that we should probably be answering here. So Diana Davidson's question.
Sorry.
Okay, there are actually two questions. And
gosh.
I might give some input to the first one, because I think it raises as many questions, you know, as I can answer. So the first one from June says, schools often have a fund that can help support parents for school trips, etc. I questioned the secondary school about this after an expectation of a donation for home economics, locker hire and getting to know you trip at the start of secondary, over £30 in the first month. Now, there's quite a lot in that. So the first thing I'm going to pick up on is school fund, how school fund comes about. So all schools will do their own fundraising, and this sometimes becomes a source of tension between a school and a parent council as to who's raising money when. I've already had one inquiry about that this week, where the school fund is empty because the school fund has been helping parents and families who have been really struggling to feed their children during lockdown. So the school has been using that money, which is the school's own fundraising, to, you know, to support families. And they will, in normal times and non-COVID times, yes, they would help with trips, but they can't help everybody in the school with trips. They would generally divert that money towards the most needy, and they would take decisions about the use, which would not be discussed with anybody else. It's very discreetly done. So school fund isn't the answer to everything. The bit about the costs, home economics does cost, food has to be purchased. These things, schools aren't always funded, you know, well to do so. So there are some costs there that, you know, parents have always had to try to help with. But I think the suggestion I'm going to make here, that getting to know you trip, these are great topics for parents to raise at a parent council meeting, or if you're not on a parent council, take them to your parent council, because they are clearly not just going to be an issue for one person. So I think all of this is great material for parent council discussion. So I'm going to leave it at that point for that question. I think the answer to the second question from Diana is probably quite similar. What suggestions do you have to start to break down the wall between schools and parents re money? I think the parent council is the focus group for parents. The parent council should be the bridge between the parent body, the parent forum, and the school. And if there is an issue, the parent council needs to be alerted to it, and it may actually inspire the parent council to do some of its own research with parents to find out how they feel about it. And if enough parents raise it with the parent council, then the school is going to have to listen to it when it's raised at those meetings. So there may be other things that, you know, Alison and Sarah want to add to that. So I'll leave that opportunity for them.
Really, that absolutely the parent council is really critical in being able to raise these things with school. And I think what's really important is obviously every parent council is different, the members on it are really different, and I think whether this gets raised with the school or not is sometimes to do with the extent to which the parent council parent council members properly understand this stuff, because, you know, potentially some may be in quite financially secure positions and just haven't thought about this stuff. So I think that's why I would suggest it as your kind of first step here, if it hasn't been done before, just talking about these things and really trying to get across to people the reality of what lots of families in the school are probably going to be facing, and facing it probably silently. So that awareness in the parent council is a really important first step to dealing with any of these issues, I think.
Also, I think and this is sort of banging the drum for our talking to resources and our research at the moment. I think good communication is obviously key to that as well. So the communication between parent councils and the parent body and the schools. But we think that, you know, a good set of, or a good way of communicating when schools are able to communicate these sorts of things effectively. I think that's a really strong barrier breaker too.
just checking that I've come off mute. There was a question about face masks and schools asking for donations to, to the payment of those. Again, schools haven't been funded to actually provide those. So if young people keep turning up without them in a secondary school and the expectation is that people are wearing them, there is going to be a cost implication for schools. But I think this is another one that parents could raise with the parent council. And there is a bit of parental responsibility, or young people being responsible for actually taking a face mask with them to school. The schools, budgets are really, really tight in schools at the moment as well. So there needs to be a little bit of give and take. Leanne has alerted me to some schools and some discussion, and it might be best if Leanne actually comes on to the chat about branding, because I haven't seen this on Twitter. But Leanne's alerting me to the fact that there's been discussion of branded face masks on Twitter. And again, I would say that if parents are unhappy with this direction of travel, the parent council should be your port of call. But I noticed that Leanne has come onto the screen and has taken her, she's put herself off mute. So I will go on to mute and let her come in there.
Yeah, it's just about trying to find time, isn't it? So you're not talking over somebody. So yeah, Judith, I wasn't quite sure whether you meant branded or just regular face masks, but I suppose there's different points there that can be covered. One, like Catherine said, if it's a case of a child going into the school and forgetting their face mask, which actually my daughter has done a couple of times since we've gone back, if the school are handing out disposable ones, first of all, like Catherine said, there is not an infinite amount of money that can continue to buy them, although the school obviously, they'd love to be able to support young people. So that kind of goes back to parental responsibility. If you can try and supply a face mask or face covering to your young person as much as possible, then it helps the entire situation. If it's reusable face masks, I know, for instance, at my own school, the parent council there used some funds to purchase some reusable face masks from a local charity that you may have seen Glasgow City Parents Group share. There's a local charity in Glasgow called Angelic Threads, and they are a group of volunteers who are creating reusable face coverings, and they are supplying them to individuals for free. So if you apply to them as an individual, you'll get a free mask, but because we applied as a group, then we had to make a small donation towards that. And that, I think it was £40 or £50 that we paid. So I think it worked out maybe £1 a mask or something, if I'm right. Faces on the call tonight, so she'd be able to just confirm that. But £40 she's saying. So, but then what I would say, and I've discussed this with Alison and Sarah, I'm starting to see a lot of secondary schools advertise on Twitter branded face coverings. Whilst I see why they would want to do that, because they're maybe trying to take away the stigma of people wearing different styles of face coverings, and they maybe want it to be kind of more part of their uniform, and they're trying to maybe kind of incorporate it into their uniform. I totally understand that. But if they're actually then charging for those face coverings, that's putting in additional pressure. And it's kind of going back to a lot of the messages Alison and Sarah have said, that parents and carers will not want their young person to feel left out. So there's that additional pressure then for them to purchase that branded face covering. Now, I don't know for sure if these schools are charging for it. They've not said anything on their Twitter in regards to a cost or whether they're giving it away for free. There's only been the one secondary school that I've saw in the last couple of days who've advertised that they have these face coverings coming out branded, and that every child will receive one. So it sounds like they're actually going to cover the cost to give every child one face mask at least. So yeah, the face mask is a difficult one, because like Catherine says, there has to be a bit of give and take. The schools can't keep affording everything. And I think to take the pressure maybe off the schools, and so that they can support those who need it, then the parents and the families who can afford to buy their face covering or who can afford to support their young person, then they need to take on a bit of personal responsibility there. That's a discussion that really needs to be done between the parent council and the parent body on what the suits your school best. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully it covered all the points.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that, you know, lots of young people in secondary schools are expecting to go out during lunch periods. They won't be able to go into local shops unless they have their face coverings too. There was an additional comment on there saying that if young people don't have them, you know, if they don't have masks, it might be a barrier to going to school. I would hope that our schools are having those conversations with families, and I know that they are, when, you know, what are the barriers to young people coming back to school? How can we help you overcome them? And if a school was aware of that as a barrier, they would be helping out. I also think that parent councils are starting to help out because they have budget, they've been fundraising, they've not been able to have the events that they would normally have, and they may be supporting with, you know, supplies of items like face coverings so that those that really need them can be given them. So as Leanne concluded, it's not an easy one. There aren't easy answers, and I think it does need a degree of flexibility and everybody trying to work together on this one.
Can I just ask, does anybody get any other questions though for Alison and Sarah? I feel like me and Catherine have maybe taken over the Q&A part of it, and throughout that presentation there was a lot of information coming out, so it would be nice if anyone had any questions about the actual presentation itself. One question maybe I could ask Alison and Sarah just now while we're waiting, is it possible that we could maybe get, well, I could get that presentation sent to me? I think there's quite a lot of information on there to kind of just soak in. So I know we're recording tonight, and this recording will go into our YouTube channel, but like you'd said a couple of slides back, it would be really useful for this presentation to be shared with, like, within parent council. So maybe if there's some members on here tonight, they can take it back and share it with their other members or with their head teacher. So even if you guys were able to send me the link to the presentation, we can put it on Glasgow City Parents Group Google Drive, and then it's just a case of kind of sharing the link with other folks, so then that they can take that back.
Brilliant. Yeah, share it far and wide. Absolutely.